farmer who had an only son. The lad had poor health, so he couldn't go out to work in the field. At home there was but little to eat and nothing at all to burn, so his father went about the country trying to get the boy a place as cowherd or errand boy. But there was no one who would take the weakly little lad till he came to the sheriff. He was ready to take him, for he had just sent off his errand boy, and there was no one who would fill his place, for everybody knew that the sheriff was a great miser. So little Freddy, that was his name, worked there for his board for 3 years. Then he wanted to leave, and the sheriff gave him all his wages at one time. He was to have a penny a year. It couldn't well be less, said the sheriff. And so he got 3 pennies in all. Little Freddy thought it was a lot of money, for he had never owned anything. But for all that, he asked if he wasn't to have something for clothes, for those he had on were worn to rags. You have what we agreed on, said the sheriff, and 3 whole pennies besides. I have nothing more to do with you. Be off. So little Freddy went into the kitchen and got a little food in his knapsack, and after that he set off on the road to buy himself some clothes. He was both merry and glad, for he had never seen a penny before, and every now and then he felt in his pockets to see if he had them all 3. So when he had gone far and farther than far, he came to the mountains. He had to rest quite often, and then he counted and counted how many pennies he had. Soon he came to the top of the mountain. There he sat down and looked to see if his money was all right. Suddenly a bigger man appeared before him, so tall and big that when he got a good look at him, the lad began to scream. Don't you be afraid, said the beggar. I'll do you no harm. I came only to beg for a penny. Dear me, said the lad, I have only 3 pennies, and with them I was going to town to buy some clothes. It is worse for me than for you, said the beggar man. I haven't 1 penny, and I am still more ragged than you. Well, that's so, said the lad. You shall have it. When he had walked on a while, he grew weary again and sat down to rest. Suddenly another beggar man stood before him, and this one was still taller and more ragged than the first. When the lad saw how very tall and ugly he was, he began to scream again. Now don't you be afraid of me, said the beggar man. I'll do you no harm. I came only to beg for a penny. Oh, dear, said the lad. I have only 2 pennies, and with them I was going to town to buy some clothes. It's worse for me than for you, said the beggar man. I have no pennies and a bigger body and less clothing. Well, said the lad, you may have it. So he went on till he got weary, and then he sat down to rest. But he had scarcely sat down when a third beggar man came to him, and this one was so tall that the lad had to look up and up, right up to the sky. And when he saw how very, very tall and ragged he was, he fell a-screaming again. Now don't you be afraid of me, said the beggar man. I'll do you no harm, for I am only a beggar man who begs you for a penny. Oh, dear, said the lad. I have only 1 penny left, and with it I was going to town to buy some clothes. As for that, said the beggar man, I have no penny at all, and a bigger body, and less clothes. Yes, said little Freddy, he must have the penny then. For so each beggar man will have 1 penny, and I will have nothing. Well, said the beggar man, since you have such a good heart that you gave away all that you had in the world, I will give you a wish for each penny. For you must know, it was the same beggar man who had them all three. He had only changed his shape each time. I've always had such a longing to hear a fiddle sing and see folks so merry and glad that they couldn't help dancing, said the lad. So I wish myself such a fiddle that everything that has life must dance to its tune. That you must have, said the beggar man, but it is a sorry wish. You must wish something better for the other 2 pennies. I love to hunt and to shoot, said little Freddy, so I wish myself such a gun that I shall hit everything I aim at. That you may have, said the beggar man, but it is a sorry wish, too. You must wish better for the last penny. I've always longed to be in company with folks who are kind and good, said little Freddy. So I'll wish it to be so, that no one can say no to the first thing I ask. That wish is not so sorry, said the beggar man, and off he strode between the hills. So the lad lay down to sleep, and the next day he came down from the mountain with his fiddle and his gun. First he went to the storekeeper and asked for clothes. Next, at a farm, he asked for a horse, and at a second for a sleigh, and at another place he asked for a fur coat. No one said no to him. Even the stingiest folk gave him what he asked for. At last he went through the country as a fine gentleman and had his horse and his sleigh. When he had gone a bit, he met the sheriff whose servant he had been. "Good day, master," said little Freddy, as he pulled up and took off his hat. "Good day," said the sheriff, "but when was I ever your master?" "Oh, yes," said little Freddy. "Don't you remember how I served you 3 years for 3 pennies? "Well, well," said the sheriff, "you have grown rich in a hurry. And pray, how was it that you got to be such a fine gentleman?" "Oh, that's a long story," said little Freddy. "And are you so full of fun that you carry a fiddle about with you?" asked the sheriff. Yes, yes," said Freddy. "I've always had such a longing to get folk to dance. But the funniest thing of all is this gun, for it brings down anything that I aim at, however far it may be off. Do you see that crow sitting in the spruce yonder? What will you give me if I hit it as we stand here?" "Well," said the sheriff, and laughed when he said it, "I'll give you all the money I have in my pocket, and I'll go and fetch it when it falls." As the gun went off, down fell the crow into a great bramble thicket. And away went the sheriff into the brambles after it, and held it up high for the lad to see. But just then little Freddy began to play his fiddle, and the sheriff began to dance, and the thorns to tear him. The lad played on, and the sheriff danced and cried and begged, till his clothes flew to tatters, and he scarce had a thread to his back. "Yes," said little Freddy, "now I think you're about as ragged as I was when I left your service. So now you may get off with what you had." But first the sheriff had to pay him all the money that he had in his pocket. When the lad came to town, he stopped at an inn, and there he began to play. And all who came danced and laughed and were merry, and so the lad lived without a care, for all the folks liked him, and no one could say no to anything he asked. But one evening, just as they were all in the midst of their fun, up came the guards to drag the lad off to the town hall. For the sheriff said he had waylaid him and robbed him and nearly taken his life. And now he was to be hanged. But little Freddy had a cure for all trouble, and that was his fiddle. He began to play on it, and the guards fell a-dancing, and they danced till they gasped for breath. So soldiers, a whole regiment, were sent to take him. But it was no better with them than with the guards. When little Freddy played his fiddle, they were all bound to dance, and dance as long as he could lift a finger to play a tune. At last they stole a march on him and took him while he lay asleep by night. Now that they had caught him, they could condemn him to be hanged on the spot, and away they hurried him to the gallows tree. There a great crowd of people flocked to see this wonder, and the sheriff too was there. He was glad to get even at last for the money and the clothes he had lost, and to see the lad hanged with his own eyes. And here came little Freddy, carrying his fiddle and his gun. Slowly he mounted the steps of the gallows, and when he got to the top, he sat down and asked if he might have leave to do one thing. He had a longing, he said, to play a tune on his fiddle before they hanged him. It was sin and shame to deny him that, they said, for you know no one could say no to what he asked. Bind me to this tree, said the sheriff, so I won't have to dance. Little Freddy was not slow in getting his fiddle to speak, and all that were there fell a-dancing at once, those who went on 2 legs and those who went on 4, both the dean and the parson, the lawyer and the sheriff, masters and men, dogs and pigs. They all danced and laughed and barked and squealed at one another. So they danced and sang till they could dance no longer. The sheriff, who was tied to the tree, danced till he scraped the clothes off his back. I dare say it was a sorry-looking sight and a sore back, but there was not one of them who thought of doing anything to little Freddy. And away he went with his fiddle and his gun, whither he chose, and he lived merrily and happily all his days. For there was no one who could say no to the first thing he asked.